The 6000 series has two sets of measurements available depending on which acquisition mode is selected. So if the acquisition mode is YT, then the measurements are YT type measurements, so they're amplitude measurements and pulse width type measurements. If the acquisition mode is selected as spectrum, then the measurements change to spectrum type measurements. So here we can measure things like frequency, harmonic distortion and signal to noise ratio. So we're going to have a look at these two sets of measurements. First we're going to look at the time measurements and then we'll look at the spectrum measurements. So just to return to the YT acquisition. So under the measurement we can select the source of the data. So this can be channels A, B, C or D, and there are 15 measurements available. So just running through them, we've got AC RMS, we can measure the cycle time, DC average value, duty cycle, full rate, the frequency of the waveform, the full time, the pulse widths, the min and max values, peak to peak, rise time, the rising rate and the true RMS. So just an example, I could measure the frequency of the signal applied. Again, we can select, we're going to measure it across the whole trace or part of the trace between the rulers. So if we had a non-repeating pulse sequence, we could select different pulses with the rulers and measure the different widths. So we'll leave it on whole trace and select OK. So here we see the measurement, frequency of the whole trace. So this particular signal has a frequency of 16 megahertz. If we want to delete a particular measurement, then we can select delete, say OK. The font size also can be changed. So the font size at the moment is 10, so we could make it slightly smaller. So you can adjust the font size. And it's possible to have up to 6 measurements available on screen at the same time. We can see there is some repeating of the measurement, so this is in taking 20 captures and then producing an average value and giving a deviation reading at the bottom.